Some calls don't come from the living, but from the moments we never finished. The rain had been falling for hours, steady and cold, the kind that soaked through fabric and memory alike, turning the forest into a blurred world of shadow and sound. And inside a worn canvas tent pitched just off an old logging road, Ethan Cole lay awake on his back, staring into the dark, listening not to the storm, but to the silence behind it, the kind that followed him home from places he never spoke about, the kind that made sleep feel like something other people were allowed to have. And beside him, Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat damp from the evening air, lifted his head slowly, ears twitching towards something beyond the rain, something Ethan could not hear, not yet, not again. And for a long moment the dog did not move, did not bark, did not growl, only listened, as if the world itself had leaned close to whisper a secret meant only for him. And then, without warning, Rex stood, his body tense but not afraid, his amber eyes fixed on the black line of trees beyond the tent flap, and Ethan exhaled quietly, rubbing his eyes with a rough hand. "It's just the storm, boy," he muttered, though his voice carried less certainty than the words suggested, because Rex was not a dog that reacted to nothing, not after everything they had been through, not after the years of training that had taught him the difference between noise and meaning. And still, the dog did not look back, did not settle, instead stepping forward and nudging the flap with his nose, once, then again, more insistent this time, until the fabric shifted and the rain hissed louder into the space. And something in that small, deliberate motion stirred a feeling Ethan hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that sat low in the chest and refused to explain itself. And when Rex turned back, his gaze locking with Ethan's, there was something in those eyes that felt almost human, almost like a question that had already been answered. And then the dog moved again, faster now, pawing at Ethan's sleeve, gripping the worn fabric gently but firmly, tugging once, then twice, as if asking, no, insisting, that he get up, that he follow, that whatever waited outside could not wait any longer. And Ethan sat up slowly, the cold pressing in around him, his joints stiff, his thoughts heavier than the soaked earth beneath the tent. "All right," he said under his breath, more to himself than to the dog, pulling on his jacket, the zipper catching halfway before he forced it closed. And as he stepped out into the rain, boots sinking slightly into the mud, the world seemed to narrow, the trees taller, the shadows deeper, the storm louder in a way that felt almost intentional. And Rex was already moving, not running, not panicked, but with a steady, unwavering pace that Ethan had learned to trust long ago, the kind that meant the dog knew where he was going, even if the man did not. And so Ethan followed, each step pulling him further from the fragile safety of the tent, further into the wet silence of the forest, the rain tapping against leaves and branches like a code he could almost understand. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of sight, something shifted, not loudly, not violently, but enough to make Rex pause for half a second, ears forward, body still, before continuing on. And Ethan felt it then, that quiet pull in his chest, the same one he had felt years ago in a place far from here, when he had waited too long, when he had listened too late. And the memory came back not as a picture, but as a weight, pressing against his ribs as the rain traced cold lines down his face, blending with something else he did not bother to wipe away. And still, he kept walking, because Rex did not hesitate. And somewhere ahead, just beyond the curtain of falling water, something was waiting. Not for anyone, not for everyone, but for him. Rex slowed as the trees grew thicker, the path beneath their feet fading into little more than wet earth and scattered roots. Yet he did not falter, his movements guided by something deeper than sight, something that seemed to pull him forward with quiet certainty. And Ethan followed with steady breaths, his boots sinking half an inch into the mud with each step, the rain soaking through the seams of his jacket, clinging to his shoulders like a weight he had carried before in another life. And for a moment he considered turning back, the thought rising like a reflex, a habit formed from years of knowing when a situation no longer made sense. But Rex pressed on, and that alone was enough to silence the doubt, because the dog had never led him wrong, not once, not even on the nights when everything else had fallen apart. And so Ethan kept moving, his eyes scanning the dark shapes between the trees until something unnatural began to take form ahead, a break in the pattern, a structure where there should have been none, and as they drew closer, the outline sharpened into the weathered frame of a small wooden house, its roof sagging slightly under years of neglect, its windows dark and hollow like eyes that had long since stopped expecting light, and Ethan slowed, his breath catching just enough to notice, because this place had not been on any map he had seen, and it did not belong out here, where the forest swallowed most things whole. Yet there it stood, quiet and waiting, as if it had been left behind on purpose, and Rex stopped at the edge of the clearing, his ears forward, body alert but not afraid, and that difference mattered, because fear would have driven him back. But this was something else entirely, something closer to recognition, and Ethan stepped forward carefully. The wood beneath the porch creaking softly as he tested his weight, the sound almost swallowed by the rain, and the door, slightly open, shifted just enough to reveal darkness beyond, not empty darkness, but the kind that held on to something, like a breath that had never been released, and he hesitated there, one hand resting against the damp frame, feeling the rough grain of the wood beneath his fingers, and for a brief second, the world seemed to still, the rain dulling to a distant hum, the forest holding its silence like a witness. And then Rex moved again, brushing past him and stepping inside without hesitation, his nails clicking faintly against the old floorboards, and Ethan followed, drawn not by courage, but by something quieter, something that felt like a second chance he had not asked for. And inside, the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of dust and aged timber, the kind that lingered in places where time had slowed down instead of moving on. And as his eyes adjusted, shapes began to form, a table pushed against the wall, a chair slightly out of place, a lantern resting near the window as if it had been set down only yesterday. And yet no tracks marked the floor, no sign of recent movement, just stillness layered over stillness. And Rex moved deeper into the room, his head low, nose close to the ground, tracing something invisible, something that Ethan could not see but could somehow feel. And then the dog stopped near the center of the room, his body stiffening for just a second before he turned his head toward Ethan, not with urgency, but with expectation, as if this was the point where the path no longer belonged to him alone. And Ethan stepped closer, his heart steady but heavier now. And beneath the quiet rhythm of the rain against the roof, he noticed it, faint at first, almost mistaken for imagination, a soft, repeating sound coming from somewhere below, too even to be random, too present to ignore. And he held his breath without realizing it, listening, the way he used to listen for signs that mattered, and whatever it was, it had been there long before he arrived, waiting, not loudly, not desperately, but patiently, as if it already knew he would come. Rex did not move from that spot, his body held in a quiet stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if even the smallest shift might disturb whatever lay hidden beneath them. And Ethan crouched slowly, his palm pressing against the worn floorboards, the wood cool and slightly damp from years of weather seeping in through unseen cracks. And there it was again, clearer now that he had stilled himself, a faint, rhythmic pulse, not loud, not mechanical, but steady in a way that made it impossible to ignore. And he closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the sound settle into him, counting without thinking the way he had been trained to do. 1, 2, 3, a pause. Then again, 1, 2, 3, and something about that pattern tightened his chest, not with fear, but with recognition, the kind that did not belong to the present. And Rex lowered his head, placing one paw firmly against a single board near the center of the room, holding it there, not scratching, not digging, just marking it. And when Ethan looked closer, he noticed the edges of that board were slightly raised, worn differently than the rest, as if it had been lifted before, many times, and then forgotten. And he ran his fingers along the seam, feeling a subtle give beneath the pressure, and with a careful motion, he wedged his fingertips into the gap and pulled, the wood resisting for a moment before shifting with a soft creak that seemed far louder than it should have in the stillness of the room. And as the board lifted, a breath of colder air rose from below, carrying with it a scent that was not decay, not neglect, but something older, something preserved. And Ethan leaned back slightly, his heartbeat steady but heavier now. And beneath the opening, a narrow space revealed itself. Not deep enough to be a full cellar, but far too intentional to be an accident. And there, just beyond the reach of the dim light filtering through the window, something reflected faintly, a dull metallic glint that caught his eye for only a second before the shadows reclaimed it. And Rex shifted closer, his nose hovering near the edge, his breathing slow, controlled, as if whatever lay below was not a threat, but something to be understood. And Ethan reached down carefully, his hand brushing against a smooth surface, colder than the air above, and he pulled it upward with steady effort, revealing a small metal box, about the size of an old ammunition case, its surface worn but intact, marked by scratches that told a story of being carried, handled, protected, and for a moment, he simply held it there, resting it on the floor beside him. The rain continuing its quiet rhythm against the roof as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because this was not random, not a coincidence hidden beneath an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, and he knew that before he even opened it, knew it in the way his chest tightened with a memory he had spent years trying to outrun. And Rex sat back slowly, watching him, not with curiosity, but with a calm that felt almost reassuring, as if the hardest part had already passed. And Ethan exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of the lid, hesitating not out of fear, but out of something deeper, the awareness that whatever waited inside would not just be an object, but an answer, and answers had a way of changing things, even when you were not ready for them. And still, he opened it, the hinges giving way with a soft, deliberate sound, and inside, resting against the worn interior, lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time but carefully preserved, and beneath it, a small, familiar object that made his breath catch in a way he could not control, because it was not just familiar, it was his, or at least it had been once, long ago, in a place where time had not moved the way it should have. And for a moment, the room seemed to shift around him, the sound of the rain fading into something distant, replaced by the quiet echo of a past he had never fully left behind. And the thought came to him without effort, without doubt, settling into place with a certainty that felt almost impossible. This had not been left here for anyone. It had been left here for him. The object rested in his palm, heavier than its size should have allowed, a small metal tag worn smooth at the edges, its surface dulled by time, but unmistakable to him in a way that bypassed thought entirely. And Ethan did not breathe for a moment as his thumb traced the faint engraving across it. Letters he had not seen in years, yet could still recall without looking, because some things did not fade, no matter how far you walked or how long you tried to forget. And the rain outside seemed to soften, as if the world itself had lowered its voice to listen, and slowly, with a steadiness that did not match the weight rising in his chest, he unfolded the paper resting beneath it, the crease resisting slightly before giving way, revealing handwriting that was careful, deliberate, and painfully familiar. And his eyes moved across the first line without fully understanding it at first, not because the words were unclear, but because of what they meant, because of who they belonged to. And for a moment, the room seemed to tilt, the present loosening its grip as something older stepped forward to take its place. And Rex remained close, sitting beside him without a sound, his presence grounded and constant, as if he understood that this was not something to interrupt, only something to witness. And Ethan swallowed slowly, his voice barely more than a breath as he read the words aloud without meaning to. If you are reading this, then you came back. And the sentence hung in the air like something unfinished finally finding its end. And he lowered the paper slightly, his gaze unfocused as memory pressed in around him, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, like the same rhythm he had felt beneath the floor. And he remembered the night that never quite left him, the one where timing had slipped just enough to change everything, the one where he had told himself he would have done things differently if he had known, if he had arrived sooner, if he had listened harder. And yet here, in this quiet, forgotten place, those ifs no longer held the same shape, because this note existed, this object existed, and that meant the story he had carried for so long was not the full one. And his eyes returned to the page, drawn forward by something deeper than curiosity, something closer to need. And the next lines were written with the same steady hand, The same calm certainty that he remembered from long ago, words that did not accuse, did not question, but simply acknowledged. You always listened, even when it was too late, but some things are not meant to be finished in one moment. And Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him in a way that felt unfamiliar, as if it had been waiting for permission to exist, and Rex shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's arm, a quiet reminder that he was not alone here, not in this moment, not in what it carried. And the paper trembled just slightly in Ethan's hand, not from fear, but from the release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. And he continued reading, the words unfolding like a path he had not known was still open. There is a place. Beneath this place, one more layer. And it was never about what was lost. It was about what could still be found. And Ethan's eyes lifted instinctively, drawn toward the opening in the floor, toward the space that now seemed deeper than it had before, and the faint rhythm returned to his awareness, steady, patient, unchanged, and for the first time, it did not feel like a warning, it felt like an invitation. And he folded the paper carefully, not rushing, not hesitating, placing it beside the metal tag as if both belonged together. And then he looked at Rex, really looked this time, and the dog held his gaze without blinking, without doubt. And in that silent exchange, something settled into place, something simple and undeniable. This was not chance. This was not coincidence. This was a path that had been waiting, and Rex had only shown him where to begin. The opening in the floor no longer looked like a forgotten space, but like a threshold, something waiting to be acknowledged rather than avoided. And Ethan shifted his weight closer. The damp would cool beneath his knees as he leaned forward, peering into the narrow darkness below, where the faint rhythm continued, steady and patient, like something that had never needed to rush because it already knew it would be found. And Rex moved beside him without hesitation, lowering his head toward the opening, his ears relaxed but attentive, his presence calm in a way that made the unknown feel less distant. And Ethan reached down again, this time not searching blindly but with intention, his fingers brushing along the inner edge until they found the outline of something more, a second panel hidden beneath the first, smoother, more deliberate in its construction. And he paused for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of the decision settle in his chest, not as doubt, but as awareness, because, once opened, whatever lay beneath would not remain separate from him. And still, he pressed his palm against it and pushed, and the panel gave way with a soft, measured shift, revealing a deeper compartment, one that extended farther than he expected, nearly 3 feet down, and within it, arranged with careful precision, were objects that spoke not of abandonment, but of purpose: a small oil lantern sealed against moisture, a folded wool blanket wrapped tightly, and a wooden box positioned at the center as if everything else existed only to protect it. And the air that rose from below carried a different scent now, faintly metallic but clean, preserved in a way that felt intentional. And Ethan reached in, his movements steady, lifting the wooden box with both hands, its surface smooth and worn in the places where it had been handled most. And he set it beside him on the floor, the sound of the rain above grounding him in the present even as everything else seemed to stretch across time. And Rex sat back, watching closely, his breathing slow and even, as if he had already seen what Ethan was about to discover. And for a moment, Ethan simply rested his hand on the lid, feeling the grain beneath his fingers, the quiet weight of something that had been waiting longer than he could fully understand. And when he finally opened it, the hinges moved without resistance, revealing the contents inside with a quiet certainty that felt almost reverent. And within the box lay a collection of items placed with care, a photograph protected beneath a thin sheet of clear plastic, a small compass with its needle still steady despite the years, and beneath them, another folded note, thicker this time, sealed with a simple strip of tape that had yellowed but held firm. And Ethan lifted the photograph first, his eyes narrowing slightly as he brought it closer to the dim light. And there, captured in a moment that had once felt ordinary, stood 2 men in uniform, their expressions calm, their posture steady, one of them unmistakably younger, untouched by everything that would follow. And beside him, the other man stood with the same quiet presence Ethan remembered, the same look that said he understood more than he ever needed to say. And for a second, Ethan allowed himself to stay in that image, too. Recognized the version of himself that had not yet learned how heavy memory could become, and then he set it down carefully, his attention returning to the note beneath, and as he peeled back the tape and unfolded it, the faint rhythm beneath the floor seemed to align with his breath, slower now, steadier, as if whatever waited was not urging him forward, but guiding him, and the first line met his eyes with a calm certainty that settled deeper than anything before it. You were never meant to carry it alone. And Ethan closed his eyes briefly, not in avoidance, but in understanding, because for the first time in years, the weight he had been holding did not feel like something he had to keep. It felt like something he had been led here to finally set down. The words lingered in the quiet air long after Ethan had read them, settling into something deeper than thought, something that did not demand understanding, but simply asked to be accepted. And for a long moment he remained still, the note resting lightly in his hands while the steady rhythm beneath the floor continued, softer now, almost in sync with his breathing, and Rex shifted closer, lowering himself beside Ethan with a calm that felt grounding, his presence steady like an anchor in a place where time seemed to fold in on itself, and Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting back to the contents of the box, to the photograph, to the compass, to the careful way everything had been placed as if someone had known exactly how this moment would unfold. And he picked up the compass, turning it slightly in his hand, watching as the needle settled without hesitation, pointing not outward, not toward some distant direction, but inward in a way that felt almost symbolic, and he let out a quiet breath, realizing that for years he had been searching for something he could not name, moving from place to place as if distance alone could soften what he carried. And yet here, in a forgotten house in the middle of the rain-soaked woods, he had been led not to an answer that explained everything, but to something that changed how he understood it, and he unfolded the note further, his eyes moving across the next lines with a steadiness that had not been there before. There is a place beneath this place, but it is not a place you can see with your eyes alone. And Ethan paused, his brow tightening slightly as he read the words again, not with confusion, but with a growing awareness that whatever this meant, it was not meant to be taken at face value. And Rex lifted his head at that moment, his ears tilting slightly, as if responding to something just beyond hearing. And then, without urgency, he stood and stepped toward the opening in the floor, lowering himself carefully until his paws touched the lower compartment, his body disappearing halfway into the space before he stopped and looked back, not with insistence, but with quiet invitation. And Ethan watched him for a second, the meaning settling into place without resistance, and he moved forward, lowering himself down into the opening, the wood pressing lightly against his shoulders as he descended the 3 feet into the hidden space, his boots landing softly beside Rex. And down there, the air felt different, not colder, but stiller, as if it had been waiting undisturbed for years, and the faint rhythm that had guided them here was clearer now, not coming from beneath the ground, but from somewhere within the walls themselves, a subtle vibration that seemed to move through the structure like a quiet pulse. And Ethan turned slowly, his hand brushing along the inner boards until he felt it, a section that did not match the rest, smoother, almost polished, and as he pressed against it, the wood shifted inward with a soft, deliberate motion, revealing a narrow passage just wide enough for a man to step through, and he paused. There, one hand resting against the edge, his breath steady but deeper now, and Rex moved ahead without hesitation, stepping into the passage as if he had known it would be there all along. And Ethan followed, not because he had to, but because something inside him had already decided. And as he stepped forward into the hidden space beyond, the world above seemed to fall away, the rain, the forest, the weight of everything he had carried for so long fading into a distant memory, and in its place was something quieter, something steady, something that did not ask him to be who he had been, but allowed him to become something else. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan did not feel like he was chasing something he had lost. He felt like he was finally walking towards something that had been waiting for him all along. The passage narrowed as Ethan stepped deeper, the wooden walls closing in just enough to make each breath feel more deliberate. Yet there was no sense of confinement, only a quiet focus, as if the space itself had been shaped to guide rather than restrict. And Rex moved ahead with steady confidence, his paws silent against the aged boards, his body language calm but attentive, as though he was following a path he had already traced long before this night, and the faint rhythm that had led them here grew clearer with every step, not louder, but more present, resonating through the structure in a way that felt almost alive, and Ethan found himself matching his pace to it without realizing, each step aligning with that steady pulse, his mind no longer drifting backward but settling into the moment in front of him. And after a few more feet, the passage opened into a small chamber, no larger than 10 by 10 feet, its walls reinforced with smooth planks that bore no signs of decay, as if time had chosen to pass around this place rather than through it. And in the center of the room stood a simple wooden table, its surface clean, untouched by dust, holding a single object that immediately drew Ethan's attention, a lantern unlike the one he had seen above, this one intact, filled, and softly glowing with a warm, steady light that cast gentle shadows along the walls, and he paused at the threshold, his breath catching not from fear, but from the quiet impossibility of it, because nothing about this place should have been functioning, and yet everything here felt intentional, maintained in a way that suggested presence without showing it. And Rex entered first, circling once before sitting near the table, his gaze lifting toward Ethan with a calm certainty that made the decision feel already made. And Ethan stepped forward slowly, his boots brushing lightly against the wooden floor, the sound muted by the stillness around him. And as he approached the table, he noticed something else, carved into the surface near the edge, faint but deliberate, a series of markings that resembled coordinates, numbers etched carefully as if meant to endure, and beside them lay another folded paper, positioned precisely in the center, waiting in a way that felt less like abandonment and more like trust, and Ethan reached for it, his fingers steady now, the hesitation from before replaced by a quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was not here to harm him. It was here to complete something that had been left unfinished. And as he unfolded the paper, the lantern's glow shifted slightly, the light catching the ink in a way that made the words stand out with clarity, and he read silently at first, then again, slower, letting each line settle into place. If you made it this far, then you chose to listen again, and that means you are ready to see what you could not see before. And Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, not from tension, but from recognition, because the words did not feel new. They felt like something he had always known but had not been able to face, and he continued reading. The map is not outside. It never was. It is carried in what you remember and what you choose to let go. And his eyes drifted briefly to the carved coordinates on the table, then back to the page. And in that moment, something shifted inside him, something subtle but undeniable, as if the weight he had been carrying had changed shape, no longer something pressing him down, but something he could finally set aside. And Rex let out a soft breath. Beside him, almost like a quiet confirmation, and Ethan lowered the paper slowly, his gaze lifting to the lantern, the steady flame reflecting in his eyes. And for the first time since stepping into the storm, the world did not feel uncertain. It felt guided, and he understood then that this place was not the destination. It was the moment of change, the point where he stopped searching for what had been lost and began recognizing what had been waiting. And as he stood there in the quiet glow, the rhythm that had led him here softened, no longer calling, no longer urging, but simply existing, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled. The lantern's glow remained steady as Ethan stood in the center of the small chamber, its warm light casting soft shadows that seemed to move just slightly along the walls, not with the flicker of flame, but with something deeper, something tied to the quiet rhythm that had now faded into a gentle presence rather than a call. And he looked down again at the paper in his hands, reading the final lines more slowly this time, not searching for meaning, but allowing it to settle where it belonged. What was lost was never yours to keep, but what remains has always been yours to carry forward. And the words did not strike him as instructions, but as a release, a quiet permission to step out from beneath the weight he had mistaken for responsibility for so many years. And his eyes drifted once more to the carved coordinates etched into the table, numbers that once would have sent him searching outward, mapping distance, measuring direction, but now they felt different, less like a destination and more like a marker, a reminder that not every path required movement across land, Some only required a shift in how you saw what was already within reach, and Rex stood slowly beside him. His ears relaxed, his posture calm, as if the urgency that had driven him through the storm had fully dissolved, leaving behind only a steady companionship that no longer needed to guide, only to remain. And Ethan folded the paper carefully, placing it back on the table with a quiet respect, not as something finished, but as something understood, and he reached for the photograph again, holding it in the lantern light, seeing it now without the distortion of regret, recognizing the moment captured there not as something he had lost, but as something that had shaped him in ways he could finally accept. And for the first time, the memory did not tighten his chest, it steadied it, grounding him in a truth that felt simple and undeniable. He had done what he could with what he had, and that had been enough, even if he had not believed it before. And the chamber itself seemed to respond to that realization, not with sound or movement, but with a subtle shift in the air, as if the space no longer needed to hold anything in place. And Ethan took a slow breath, deeper than any he had taken since the night began, and when he exhaled, it felt lighter, not because something had been removed, but because something had been set down. And he looked at Rex, meeting his steady gaze, and in that quiet exchange there was no question, no need for direction, only a shared understanding that the path forward did not lie deeper beneath the house, but back through it, back into the world that had once felt too heavy to return to. And Ethan turned toward the passage, the lantern's glow following him just enough to light the way. And as he stepped back through the narrow corridor, the chamber behind him remained unchanged, its purpose fulfilled without needing to disappear. And when he climbed back through the hidden compartment and into the main room above, the sound of the rain greeted him again, softer now, no longer a barrier, but a presence that felt almost cleansing. And the house, once silent and uncertain, no longer felt abandoned. It felt complete, as if it had been waiting for this single moment to pass through it. And Ethan stepped toward the open door, the cool air brushing against his face as he crossed the threshold. And outside, the forest stood still beneath the falling rain, the darkness no longer pressing in, but opening outward. And for the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was being pulled by something unseen. He felt like he was choosing where to go, and that choice, simple as it was, carried more meaning than anything he had found inside the hidden space below. The rain continued to fall as Ethan stepped fully into the open, its steady rhythm no longer heavy against his shoulders but soft, almost familiar, like something that had always been there waiting for him to notice it differently. And Rex moved beside him without pulling, without urgency, his pace matching Ethan's naturally now, no longer leading but simply walking with him. And for a moment, they stood just outside the doorway of the old house, the forest stretching quietly in every direction. The darkness no longer closing in but opening outward with a calm that felt earned rather than given. And Ethan turned back once, his eyes resting on the worn structure behind him, the door still slightly open, the faint outline of its shape blending into the trees as if it belonged there in a way that did not require explanation. And he realized then that nothing about what had happened needed to be proven, nothing needed to be carried as evidence, because what mattered had already settled inside him, in a place that did not depend on memory alone but on understanding. And he reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the metal tag and the folded paper he had taken with him, not as something to hold on to, but as something that had found its way back to him at the exact moment it needed to. And Rex glanced up at him briefly, his amber eyes steady, reflecting the faint light of the overcast sky. And Ethan gave a small nod, not as a command, but as a quiet acknowledgement of everything the dog had done without ever needing to explain it. And together they stepped away from the house, their boots pressing into the wet ground as they moved back toward the unseen path they had followed earlier, though now it did not feel like a path at all, just a direction chosen with clarity rather than uncertainty. And the forest seemed different as they walked, the same trees, the same rain, but without the weight that had once filled the spaces between them. And as they reached the edge of the clearing where the tent had been left behind, Ethan paused again, looking out into the distance where the faint outline of the road would eventually appear, leading somewhere, anywhere. And for the first time in a long while, the idea of moving forward did not feel like running from something. It felt like stepping into something he could finally accept. And he took a slow breath, the cool air filling his lungs without resistance. And as he exhaled, the last trace of that old rhythm seemed to fade completely, not lost, not gone, but no longer needed to guide him. And Rex settled beside him, sitting calmly as if the journey had reached its natural end, his presence steady and unwavering. And Ethan placed a hand gently on the dog's head, the gesture simple but full, carrying a quiet gratitude that did not require words. And after a moment, he straightened, his gaze lifting toward the gray horizon where the rain began to thin, the sky opening just enough to let a softer light filter through. And he stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, each step grounded, each movement his own, and the forest did not call him back. It let him go, and somewhere in that quiet release, something deeper settled into place. Something that had nothing to do with what he had found beneath the house, and everything to do with what he had found within himself. And as he and Rex disappeared into the rain-softened path ahead, there was no need for certainty about where it would lead, because for the first time, Ethan was not following a call, he was choosing the direction, and that was enough.